Hello, hello. Welcome to Bold Strokes Books, Bookathon number a zillion. I don't know how many it is really. We're going to go with a zillion. Thank you for all being here. We're just going to give you a few extra seconds to filter in. If you don't know me, I'm Sandy Lowe. I'm Bold Strokes Books senior editor and official Bookathon host. I have with me some lovely, lovely authors and hopefully a couple more on the way too. Oh, look at that. Ask and you shall receive. Hi, Greg. Oh, no sound yet. Okay, so this panel has a very special theme. And all the panels this week actually have a special theme along the romance arc. And today we start off with the very beginning, which is the meeting. So hopefully all these readings will show the characters meeting and all the fun and interesting things that happen when you, of course, bump into the love of your life completely by accident, right?
Okay.
All right.
I'm just laughing at Greg. I'm sorry. This is so
I'm trying
enjoyable.
I'm just trying to like move on
great.
with the show.
I can't help it.
Love you, baby.
All right. So I do need a second to start the Facebook Live. And so I have an opening question. And that question is, tell us a little bit about your character from this novel. I'm going to start with Melissa, and then Melissa, you can pass it to the next person.
Okay, great. I love the question. I'll be reading today from Marry Me, so that's where I'm going to grab the character from. And I'm going to go with Allison Hale, and she's a 4th grade teacher, and she's somebody who, you know, in a sea of people doesn't always imagine herself to be the most exciting. And what she doesn't realize is that everyone else does, and they think that she's awesome and she's great. So that's a little bit of her arc and to learn about herself. But what made her so much fun to write is how quirky she is and whimsical and fun. And so when you write a character like that, it really feels like the sky's the limit with where you can go. And for a writer, that's freeing in a lot of ways, that she has fewer rules. And so I loved getting to write Allie. And now I'm going to send it to Cass to see what her favorite character was to write.
So I'm reading today from Love's Compromise. So I love both the characters, but I think Brooke, who she's a caterer. She started a catering business. She's kind of trying to figure out all these bumpy, awful parts of her old relationship, which is being kind of dusted off, and she's finding all these new places to go and these new ways to exist where she found happy and contentment. And so getting to write her journey in finding that was it was really rewarding because I get to make her what I want to make her. I got to experience the journey and then see it finally culminate in her getting to do exactly what she wants to do despite all the trouble.
Very cool.
Awesome. Greg, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your favorite character.
I missed the whole question.
So, the question was just to tell us a little bit about your favorite character.
In the book I'm reading from?
That's correct.
Sorry, I was being interviewed on the phone and it went long.
You're so famous.
Yeah, right. I'm going to be reading from Bury Me in Shadows, which was my October release. But this is my January release, which I'm not going to be reading from because reasons. I think my favorite character in Bury Me in Shadows is actually my main character's mom. I just think she's kind of kick-ass and badass, and I really like her, and she was a lot of fun to write. But she's not in it very much. Maybe that's why I enjoyed writing her so much, since I didn't have to spend a lot of time with her. But yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. I can see that. Sometimes the secondary characters are way less work.
Yeah, lots of work. Way less.
And Jeanette, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your favorite character.
Yeah, I'm reading from Late City Summer. It's my first book. I also kind of hate to pick between the two main characters, but I guess if I did, I would go with Kate Alessi. She's really just a New Yorker, which I've lived in New York for 10 years now, and it was writing her was a little bit of a lot of the people that I know here, and like I really enjoyed writing somebody who comes off as very confident, very sarcastic, a little bit rough on around the edges, and getting to see what was under the surface there, and that there's somebody who's not quite as confident, that there's somebody who needs someone else to sort of check them, and it was fun to write that dynamic between the two main characters, between her and Emily. So it was a lot of fun to write, and
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're really looking forward to all these great readings. We're going to hear from Melissa Brayden, who is reading from Marry Me, which is still the best title ever. Melissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, and you can start reading whenever you're ready.
Okay. So as Sandy alluded to, I will be reading from Marry Me, which was a book that was out in November. So that means it's available now. Yay. And it's the story of Allison Hale, who is a fourth grade teacher, and she is getting married to the most eligible bachelor in Dallas, and she has hired Megan Kincaid to be her wedding planner. And in the course of working together and planning the event, Allison and Megan have learned that there is more happening between them than they had planned on. And so in this particular scene, Megan is trying to learn a little bit more about the couple to figure out how to best choose a venue for them. And she's also taking this opportunity to maybe put a few cards on the table. And while this isn't the scene where the characters meet for the first time, I picked it out because it is the scene where the characters are meeting each other as their true selves for the first time, because they're finally confessing a few things that they haven't yet talked about before. I've never tried to characterize our couplehood. Allison smiled thoughtfully. Maybe I need to try so that we can, capture this event a bit better. Well, want to take a walk around the water and hash some of it out? Megan also saw this as an opportunity to put more cards on the table and find a way to reset them. Allison nodded. It's a pretty day. Let's do it. Their pace was slow. It was chilly out, but not cold enough to require jackets. Tell me about you, Brent. Okay, well, we have a lot of fun together, he and I, teasing and laughing a lot. That's a big part of us. Adorable, Megan said. I think you have to laugh. It helps you through the harder times. I completely agree. And we're also incredibly practical. I mean, we're not afraid of doing what works for us, which sometimes makes other people raise an eyebrow. Megan frowned. In what way? Well, we haven't moved in together. We stay at each other's places a handful of times a week, but I have my life, he has his, and the overlap is the fantastic cherry on top. Well, seems like you have it all figured out. Impressive. Oh, I'm not sure I would go that far. I mean, we're not perfect. Well, you sound pretty ideal for one another. In a lot of ways, this was helpful for Megan to hear. Allison was happy with where she was, and everything was as it should be. Here's a confession for you, Allison said. And I have no idea while I'm telling you this, except that I feel like you're my friend. Megan reached out and squeezed her hand. I am. She stared out at the water. I wonder if Brent chose me, because this way he'll always be the one to shine. Megan frowned. What are you talking about? I'm not following. Well, think about it. With me next to him, he gets to be the shiny penny. I mean, Brent can have any woman he wants, and he chose me, ordinary me. I'm not glamorous or exciting or rich or overly ambitious. I mean, by comparison, let's admit, he sparkles. No. Stop right there. Megan paused their walk to emphasize her point. Anger flared. You are no one's shadow, and you certainly do not pale compared to him. Megan turned to Allie Foley, looked her straight in the eye. I have news for you. You light up every room you walk into. Allie opened her mouth to protest, but Megan held up a finger. No, you listen because I never lie. In a sea of people, you stand out not only because you're beautiful, but you're special. And I can't stand another minute of you not understanding that. You're the shiny penny, Allie. Any person who spends 5 minutes with you can see that. She heard the passion in her voice and took a breath and a literal step back. Allison blinked at her, not saying anything. The look on her face was nothing short of mystification. Is that client talk? The way she said it meant she knew the truth. No, damn it, and I wish it was. It's how I feel. Megan said, all of it bubbling to the surface. The more time I spend with you, the more I want. Why were these words falling from her lips without permission? And that's certainly not because you're every day. It's like I can't get enough. Do you sometimes wonder how we became friends so fast? Allison asked. Megan rolled her lips in. Yeah, it feels right, like we were meant to meet. Allison took a step forward. I feel that way too. There's just something. What? Megan needed to hear the end of that sentence desperately. What were you going to say? That there's something here. She made the gesture between us. It's nice and it's terrifying, but it's real. Megan nodded. I know. Allison exhaled in relief. Wow. Okay, so now that we've said that, it's out there. And we can relax and get back to life as scheduled, right? They shared a laugh before the noticeable tug between them returned. Allison bumped her shoulder as they continued their walk. And who would have predicted it? A fourth grade teacher who looks forward to dressing as a giant crayon for the Halloween parade and Dallas's most sophisticated event planner are friends. Megan closed one eye and regarded Allison. A crayon, you say? No. Oh yeah, a purple one. I could set you up with orange. I have an extra. Megan held up a hand, feeling lighter. No, I'm good. Megan stared at her. This isn't going to be easy, is it? The smile on Allison's lips dimmed. No, it isn't, but we're going to be just fine. Good as new. They stared at each other, not wanting to say goodbye. Megan held on to this little bit of time when Allie felt like hers. It was a mirage, a myth. But sometimes it was easier to lie to herself than get caught in a fantasy. Shall we? Allison asked. Megan nodded, her heart sad. Let's get out of here. And that's the end of that scene, but I promise it gets happier.
I love that. The point where they're really getting to know each other, maybe like meeting their true, the true person, right? Not the like.
That's right. Not the facade from those first meetings. This is when they actually start to reveal who they are. So they're meeting each other for the first time in another way, Sandy.
I love it. Perfect. And thank you for the save. Appreciate that too.
Oh, no problem. No problem at all.
All right. We are going to try this again. Second time lucky. If I share the right screen this time. There we go. Please enjoy this excerpt from Sweet Surprise by Jenny Frame.
Hi, this is Jenny, and today I'm going to be reading from my newest release, Sweet Surprise. This scene I'm going to read from is when the two main characters meet. They do have an encounter in the prologue, but this is the first time they officially meet. I hope you'll like it. Just as the workmen were bringing out the last mirror to put up, one of them lost their grip, and the mirror came crashing to the floor, shattering glass everywhere. Dexter jumped and frightened ran. Dexter, Mac called after him, but it was too late. He had already shot out the door. Fuck. Mac ran out of the shop after him. Once on the pavement, she looked both ways and saw nothing. Panic was filling her. Traffic was heavy. And if Dexter ran onto the roads, he'd be a goner. Which way should she look first? Mac picked right and jogged a few steps. But her attention was drawn to the sweet shop next door to hers. A woman's laughter drew her to the door, and she saw a woman with blonde hair facing away from her with Dexter up in her arms, his little head resting on her shoulder. Relief swept through Mac, and she hurried into the shop. You got my Dexter. Thank you so much for rescuing him. The woman turned slowly, and Mac got the surprise of her life. You? It was the woman she had saved from the gang of drunk men. The woman gasped, and her face went white as a sheet. They stared at each other silently. Mac's heart pounded, as the memories of that night flooded back. An older woman from behind the counter came up to them and said, "Do you know each other?" Before Mac could speak, the woman thrust Dexter at her and ran through to the back of the shop. Yes, no, Mac couldn't think straight. The woman that she saved that fateful night, before she and Nicky went to deal with their little drug pusher problem, had haunted her thoughts. When Mac had looked into her eyes, she'd seen a lost soul and felt a need that she didn't quite understand. But she never expected to see her again, especially not next door to her barber's. Yes, we met, but I didn't get her name. Can you ask if I can speak to her? I'll try, but I don't know if she will. She's quite reserved. When the older woman walked into the back of the shop, Mac remembered to breathe. Her heart was thumping in her chest. It's her, Dex. Mac didn't know anything about this woman or her life, but she wanted to know. She had to know. She kissed Dexter and said, "Don't you run off again, you could get hurt." She heard someone come back through the beaded curtain that led to the back of the shop. Mac looked up, hoping to see her mystery woman. But instead, she saw her older co-worker. "I'm sorry, she's not able to talk right now. Can I take a message?" Mac was disappointed. "It's okay. Just tell her I wanted to say hello and ask how she was. I've opened a barber shop next door." "Oh, you're the new owner. I'm Sandra, by the way." "I'm Mac, and this is Dexter." "What's your friend's name?" Mac said. Sandra hesitated for a second and said, "Flora." "Can you tell Flora that I'm grateful for her rescuing my little Dexter? And if she ever wants to talk, just pop in next door. I'd love to speak to her." "I will do, but as I say, she's shy." Mac nodded and walked out of the shop. She inhaled a large lungful of air. This was insane, and the coincidence of all time. The woman she'd saved on the night her life changed was right next door to her, but didn't want to talk to her. Flora. Mac tried out her name. It seemed fate had brought them together, just as it did that night outside the casino. Why was she so hesitant to talk to her? It felt like Flora was frightened of her, but Mac had helped her. Perhaps it was seeing her that brought the whole horrible night back to her. Mac hoped so anyway. The last thing she wanted was for Flora to be frightened of her. She turned back to the shop window, hoping that her mystery woman had come out from the back of the shop, but there was no sign. She turned when she heard Liam shout, "You got Dexter, Mac?" Mac turned and walked back to her shop. "Aye, the sweet shop lady had him." "That's going to be dangerous," Liam said. "What do you mean?" "A sweet shop, a few paces from work." Liam smiled and patted his stomach. "My belly is going to grow bigger and bigger. I'll need to spend every night in the gym." "You're not wrong," Mac said. Liam walked back into the barber's and Mac looked to the sweet shop. "I don't know about you, Dex, but I feel we're going to be eating more sweets too." Flora was a mystery she wanted to solve. I hope you enjoyed that reading and thank you for listening to me. Cheerio.
Oh, cheerio. Love me some Jenny Frame. There's sweets, there's surprises, and there's a mystery woman. So please do pick up that book. If you haven't read it yet, I did put the link in the chat roll for you. Alrighty, up next we have Greg Herren, who has 2 new releases in this bookathon and is reading from Bury Me in Shadows tonight. Hi, Greg.
Hey, Sandy.
Why don't you tell the lovely listeners a little bit about Bury Me in Shadows, and you can start reading whenever you're ready.
All right. Bury Me in Shadows is a Gothic novel set in rural Alabama based on an old family legend of mine from the pre-Civil War era. My main character has come to spend the summer with his dying grandmother in the middle of nowhere out in the upper hills of Alabama. And at the same time, an archaeology team from the University of Alabama is excavating the old plantation house ruins, which are in the woods behind the main house where his grandmother now lives. And one of the archaeology students has asked Jake out on a date. And they've had a couple of meetings before this particular scene, but this is the first scene where they actually spend more than a couple of pages actually talking to each other. So without further ado, here goes nothing. All right. You really don't know anything about your family history, Bo grinned at me as he sat down again. Another flash of thunder and lightning, but this time the porch light flickered. The wind was picking up, spraying the rain further up onto the porch. I grabbed my glass and the pitcher and gestured for Bo to follow me back into the kitchen. The screen door slammed behind him, and for a moment I heard an angry voice shout in a drawl, "Jacob! What have I told you about slamming that door?" I almost dropped my glass and set the pitcher down on the counter heavily. I held onto the counter for a moment, breathing hard. The air in the kitchen was cool, with the rain beating a steady backbeat on the air conditioner chugging away in the window. For a moment, though, the kitchen was hot. The air was heavy with water and anger. A long strip of yellowed fly paper littered with the corpses of dead flies twisted lazily in the light breeze coming through the window over the sink. And I smelled grease, bacon grease, and that other smell. Jake, are you okay? Yeah, I shook my head, and the kitchen was cool again. There were goosebumps on my arms. I felt a little sick, not quite right, but sick wasn't the right word. It was the aftermath of fear, that slow adrenaline crash when the danger has passed and I was safe again. And I think I may need to sit down for a minute. Coming into the cold so fast from the hot, Bo nodded, straddling a chair and putting his elbows on the kitchen table. Maybe. I pulled out the chair across from him and slid into it, shaking my head. I just had a dizzy moment, that's all. Maybe something was wrong with me. I heard Mom saying again, mumbling over the phone line, "It's a bad place." Places couldn't be bad, could they? The history of Corinth County is written in blood. I've had some odd experiences since I got here, I said slowly, putting my hands down flat on the table. The air conditioner continued to chug along in the window. The rain continued with no sign of let up. More lightning, so close this time I could smell the ozone as the thunder rattled and shook the house. The lights flickered again. What else do you know about the Blackwood family history? I asked. Bo grinned back at me. Besides the Lost Boys, did you know that the original Blackwood, Jeremiah, married a witch? What? He laughed. Jeremiah Blackwood was the original settler up here. Bo grinned at me. He got a land grant that made up the original plantation, most of this little mountain with all its hollers and a lot of the flat land down at the bottom, pretty much all the land down to the banks of the Sipsey River. That was the boundary. His first wife died and he went to New Orleans and brought home a wife. Everyone thought she was a witch, so the story goes. Poor thing was probably just a Catholic, but it's a hard kind of Christianity people believe in around here. He scratched his nose. The story is a mob dragged her off and burned her at the stake, and she cursed them all from the flames, including her husband and his descendants. Seriously? It's probably just a story. There's no record anywhere of any such thing happening. But when the boys disappeared, you see how these kinds of legends take root. Bo tugged on his ear. Well, that's kind of what we're doing out at the ruins, he said slowly. Part of what we're doing is trying to see if there's any truth to the legends and stories. The Yankee army never made it to Corinth County. The closest they ever came was Tuscaloosa. He scowled. That's why we wonder about the story of the Yankee deserter being true. No other building in this county burned, and communication wasn't, what it is today or even later in the 19th century. Are those stories true? Possibly. There's a couple of other Yankee deserter stories in the history. He ticked them off on his fingers. The Lost Boys of Blackwood Hall. Blanche Fowler was supposedly raped and robbed, and Serena Collingsworth supposedly killed one. His smile got a little crooked. The wicked Yankee deserter, looting and raping his way across the country. It's an apocryphal story down here. One mother scared their children into behaving with. Exactly, Bo beamed at me. The most famous is the one in Gone with the Wind, of course. That book sold a bazillion copies and everybody's seen the movie. And of course, by demonizing the enemy, you made the Southern cause seem even more noble. I shook my head. Are there any possibilities for the Lost Boys? The last record of anything from Blackwood Hall before Zebulon returned was a typhus outbreak here. It's actually in the Corinth paper from the time, warning people away from coming up here. So it's logical to assume Louisa Blackwood died from typhus. Someone buried or put up a headstone, even if it was just wood and not stone. Is it possible that the boys also died of typhus? What would the enslaved people have done in that case? If everyone in the family was gone, what would they do? What would you have done? Run away, I replied promptly, especially if the whole family was dead. There's no telling what would have been done to them. I started to say something else, but heard something faint and distant, someone calling. Over the downpour and the thunder and the lightning, I heard something. Do you hear that? Bo cocked his head to one side. It sounds like Dr. Brady. He went out the kitchen door to the mud porch. I followed. Once we were out on the porch, the rain was even louder. It seemed like the rain was coming down harder, which didn't seem possible. The sheet of water draining off the porch roof was almost a solid curtain, and when lightning came again, it was close. The thunder was so loud my ears rang. Bo hesitated before going down the back stairs. He slipped in the grass and went down, sinking into the mud a bit. I tried not to laugh, but it was hard not to. His face and entire front were covered in orange mud. I went down to help him. I was soaked within seconds. My teeth started shattering as I shouted, "Are you okay?" He nodded and gestured with his head toward the road into the woods. I glanced over and saw that the muddy streams were running fast downhill. I heard Dr. Brady again, and it sounded like he was calling for help. Where was everyone else from the dig? I wondered as I followed Bo to the tree line. The edges there crumbled away underneath our feet, and Bo slipped again, going down hard on his backside, and slid before I could grab him, was carried away by the rushing water. Bo! I went after him just as headlights turned into the carport. I caught him and grabbed him, pulling him up to his feet. Water was running down my face and into my eyes. I managed to keep following Bo, keeping my eyes on his wet back, the water running off of him, my skin turning to prunes before my eyes. Onward we slogged, but once in the woods we were a little more protected from the rain. The ground was still soggy and the water was still rushing down the hill, but it wasn't as bad. It seemed to take forever, but we finally reached the clearing. I put my hand up to shield my eyes from the rain, and Bo grabbed my hand and pointed. Close to the back corner of the old mansion, I could see a yellow rain slicker being held aloft, being pelted by rain and pine needles. I splashed my way back there, my legs getting more and more tired each time I freed a foot from the goopy mud. I followed Bo around the side of the mansion to where Dr. Brady was holding up a yellow tarp. "The rain," he shouted at us over the rain of the deluge, "must have washed it free." I followed his eyes and looked down at the ground at what he was trying to shield from the rain. It was a human skeleton, half exposed in the red mud, the bones stained orange. And that's it for my reading. Welcome back.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. That's how a mystery writer writes a meeting scene. I love it. All right. Next up, we have Jeanette Beers, who is reading from their release, Late City Summer. Hello, hello.
Yeah, thanks.
Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, and you can start reading whenever you're ready.
Cool. Yeah, my book, Late City Summer. It is set in the 1940s in New York City. It's about two characters who meet in 1942. And one character returns to the city. The character Emily returns to the city 4 years later, where she is engaged to be married in New York City. And she runs into Kate, who happens to be her photographer for her wedding, and they reconnect. So I actually have 3 different times, I would say, where the two characters meet. This is the second of the two. It's, I guess, the first proper meeting of the two in the earlier storyline. So yeah. And in this scene, Emily is out with her cousin Allie and her boyfriend Art at a dance hall. It's her first night in the city. "Can I get you ladies something to drink?" Art yelled over the commotion. "Such the gentleman." Allie gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he blushed. "Whiskey," Emily replied immediately. She was suddenly more alive and excited than any time she could remember. She felt herself moving to the music as she waited for Art to struggle through the bar and return. The crowd was constantly shifting around her, and in a second, a young, dark-haired soldier inadvertently backed into her. "So sorry, miss," he yelled, turning around. "Not a problem. You can make it up to me with a dance." Emily took his hand. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Art, grabbed the shot from his hand, downed it, much to the surprise of everyone watching. Allie looked on in obvious shock as Emily gave her a glowing smile. She's fitting in just fine, I'd say, she heard Art say as she reached for the boy's arm. She seems to have forgotten that she has her own boy at home, Allie replied and took her drink from Art. Allie dragged the boy towards the dance floor. After at least 5 songs, Emily hustled back through the crowd to the bar where Allie and Art seemed enamored by their own conversation. Sweating and out of breath, she was smiling harder than she had in such a long time. This is fantastic, she said, turning toward the bar for a glass of water. And just what would Tommy think about that? Allie asked, somewhat seriously, but still grinning. It won't hurt anything, Al, she replied, chugging the water and then ordered another shot of whiskey. He's back home and I plan to have a good time. It isn't like we're married. Well, I'm sure that won't be the case for long. Emily paused, looking at Allie, a nervous jolt running through her. We've only been dating for... Kate, you made it, Allie said, looking over Emily's shoulder. She turned to find a young woman just a bit taller than herself approaching the group. Allie flew by her to wrap the stranger in a fierce hug. Why does it seem like I know her? You were right. I missed the damn express this morning and got to work late. I stayed over to make up time. Kate separated herself from Allie. You should have just taken the train from the start or driven yourself. You have your car, Allie said. Kate turned to the bar and ordered a drink. Emily continued to stare at the young woman who was surprisingly dressed in slacks. Despite her classic beauty, her look was natural. She wore a plain white button-down shirt, her dark hair stylish, but not overdone. As she caught herself staring, it dawned on her. You? Me? Kate turned back to her, seeming confused but somewhat amused. You ran into me at the station. Oh, she sipped her beer. I thought you looked familiar. Emily stared, this time growing in frustration as Kate merely smiled back at her as though it were a non-issue. Familiar? A minute off the train and I get run over and all you say is that I look familiar? That's the city for you. The city? Emily was almost yelling at this point. Emily, this is my friend from school, Kate Alessi, Allie said. Kate held out her hand for Emily, who took it without a trace of remorse for their earlier interaction. Emily hesitantly offered her own, still angry. I'm Emily. Well, it's nice to meet you. Allie told me her country bumpkin cousin would be in for the summer. I said no such thing, and you know it. Allie pushed Kate's arm playfully. As if she weren't there, Kate leaned across Emily to the bar and ordered another drink, which she handed to Emily, but replacing her own empty glass. Country bumpkin? Emily asked, not letting the subject drop. Art, help me out here, Allie pleaded. I wasn't even there when you told her. He feigned innocence. Art and Kate smiled as Allie hit him on the chest. You can take me to the dance floor for that, Allie said, grabbing his arm. The two scampered off towards the crowd, leaving Emily and Kate at the bar. Emily took another long drink from the whiskey Kate had ordered for her, which seemed to surprise Kate, and once again she laughed. Better slow down there a bit. I wouldn't want to have to carry you home later. I'll be fine, thank you very much. Emily glared at the other woman. She wondered, even in her admittedly tipsy state, why Kate was staring at her with only a smirk. It's obvious you've never been to the city, so first impressions? Kate asked. Why is it so obvious I've never been here? You're the one who can't catch a train, she replied, proud of her point. Kate kept watching her and seemed to want to keep her riled up. I could have if someone had been moving and not gazing all starry-eyed around the fancy station. Emily searched for a response as Kate grinned in clear satisfaction. Emily took another drink. Even her voice is annoying, deep and smooth, and Emily shook her head. Aside from a few interesting individuals, she looked at Kate, I happen to like what I've seen. Kate nodded, apparently enjoying the sparring. Incoming at 4:00. What? Another young soldier approached Emily as Kate took another drink. Hey, sugar, I'm Ralph. How about a dance? He asked with a false sense of bravado. He was clearly nervous. Emily looked at Kate, who merely smiled and then turned back with a contemptuous smile of her own. Why, of course, she answered, earning a genuine smile from the young man. The two of them headed off to the dance floor, passing Allie and Art just as they returned. Emily noticed their expressions and actions from the dance floor, but Ralph was rambling on and on about himself. I ship out at the end of the month, which is really exciting. You seen anyone? I bet you are. All the pretty ones are taken. Kate over there will never give me a dance, though. Really now. His last sentence caught her attention. She waited until the end of the song, listening to Ralph continue about his deployment his excitement to go to war, the honor of the military, and on and on. When it ended, she pulled Ralph back over to the bar to meet Kate. Ralph here says that you never give him a dance. Now that's just impolite, even for you city folk. Well, I don't dance, so I usually don't make an exception for Ralph here, Kate replied, seeming nervous. Emily had caught her in her own trap. Well, now you do. Emily pushed Kate at Ralph. Then she gave Kate a determined, smug look, waiting for Kate to refuse. Kate scowled back, but let Ralph lead her out into the crowd, shaking her head as if she had no idea what had just happened. Art and Allie returned at the same time, Allie staring in disbelief as Kate and Ralph passed them. How in the world did you manage that? She asked Emily. She never gives in to that poor boy. Us country bumpkins aren't completely socially handicapped. Emily ordered yet another drink from the bartender. Late into the night, the four of them stumbled out onto the street. They were all in good spirits as they walked away from the dance hall, which was still bustling, crowded, and noisy. The evening had cooled down, and most of the bars in the area had closed up shop. They wandered away from the hall, Art holding Allie, Kate keeping her distance in the back, and Emily leading the way. All but Art were clearly drunk. Luckily, he knew where they were going. If and when Emily made a wrong turn, they wouldn't be wandering in New York City all night long. Kate watched from the back as Emily continued boldly, though she swayed slightly as she walked. I knew she was going too fast. I couldn't have handled half of what she drank, Allie complained. You did have half, at least. Art lovingly put her in her place. That's what happens when you let country bumpkins find out what a real party's like, Kate yelled over to Emily, who immediately stopped and turned as if to dispute her remark. Emily let Art and Allie wander ahead and drifted back to join her. Yeah, well, you should have seen the look on your face when she tripped on the sidewalk and stopped to take off her shoes. Kate instantly wanted to help her, but stopped herself. Yeah, I know, when you pushed me into the endlessly rambling Ralph. Emily stopped and bent over in laughter. Kate looked on with a smile, then took Emily by the arm and guided her forward. Come on, I don't want to be out here all night. Always in a bad mood. Emily scrunched up her face mockingly and giggled. Me? You got all huffy about the station, not me, replied Kate. Well, you city people think you're hot. Emily. Allie stopped her. Emily giggled. Kate caught Allie looking over at her more often than necessary, but she blamed it on the alcohol and the apparent need to pick a fight. She hadn't let go of Emily's arm, though, fearing the other woman would trip again. She felt Emily loop her arm through hers and lean into her. Kate caught herself having to hide a satisfied look as warmth spread through her, caused by having Emily so close. She convinced herself that she was resisting making a sarcastic remark, but then she realized she just didn't have one for once. She was simply enjoying the moment. Maybe they could be friends despite the constant harassment. She seemed fun, and she was Allie's cousin after all, so that meant a lot. They turned the corner into Allie's street and stopped in front of the apartment. Well, at least I didn't have to carry you like I thought I would, Kate said in a joking way. We're just full of surprises, us country people, Emily replied. Like you could anyway. I'm sure. Well, I'm headed home. I'll walk with you, Kate, Art said. Wouldn't want her to have to try and catch a train all by herself now, would we? Emily said. No, some other clueless pretty girl might be waiting to get in my way again, Kate retorted. Emily glared but didn't reply. She resigned herself to the steps, not waiting for Allie. Kate smiled in victory. Nice to meet you, Emily. Emily didn't stop but waved her hand as she opened the door. Kate watched as it closed and said her goodbyes to Allie. As she and Art headed off, she thought it was probably the best night she'd had in a long time, and she looked forward to seeing Allie's cousin again soon.
Oh, that was definitely a meat clash. I don't know whose side I'm on, but I think I might be on Ralph's side, if I'm honest. I mean, yeah. He kind of endeared himself.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you.
Last up, we have Cass Sellars. Hello. Cass is reading from Love's Compromise. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about the book and start reading whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the story centers around Piper and Brooke. Piper is a golf pro at a private club by day and an artist by night. She and Brooke have met briefly before at Piper's art show, but this is the first time they've really spoken alone. They knew there was something there. And Piper had told her the story of wild turkeys on the 12th green while she was shamelessly flirting with her instead of charming art buyers, which she hates to do. So here Piper's getting a surprise phone call that she isn't really prepared for. Piper's phone rang. Piper, it's Brooke. Am I catching you at a bad time? Piper's heart pounded at the sound of Brooke's voice. Not at all. How are you? She hoped she didn't sound like a giddy teenager when the cool kid talked to her. I just found out that I got the job. I mean, the one I was telling you about at the market. Not that she needed to know that, but I thought I'd tell you anyway. The ensuing laugh sounded nervous and adorable. Congratulations. So what's the next step? Well, plan, stress some more, second guess myself, and try not to freak out. No freaking out. You got the job, which means they loved you, and you're well on your way to being the go-to cater chef around here. Well, that's a long leap. I think stressing is a much safer plan. You ready to take me up on the evening on the green de-stressor? It's clinically proven to work miracles. Oh, really? Well, and what clinic is that? Well, how about I just promise it works? Piper matched her playful tenor. How's tonight? Piper wasn't prepared for her to accept and stuttered for a second. Sure. Does now work? Actually, yeah, I'm about 20 minutes away and I can bring the beer. Piper tried to walk at a normal pace despite the sudden butterflies of excitement swarming in her gut. She felt drawn to Brooke. Piper jumped into the passenger seat of Brooke's van when it slowed beside her. So how'd I get so lucky? Piper scanned Brooke's face and tried to determine the mood that put her in a dark parking lot with her on a Sunday night. I didn't feel like hanging out with a crowd at the neighbor's barbecue. Your offer sounded much more peaceful. Piper wondered about the story behind the cloudy look in Brooke's eyes. They parked and Piper walked them to a shiny black golf cart. She drove them close to the wood line to the 12th green and parked onto a secluded carpet of pine needles overlooking the valley. Brooke exhaled loudly. Wow, awesome view. I can see why you call it a stress reliever. Not done yet. Come with me. Piper produced a tarp and a few large towels, which she spread out. How did you find this? Brooke's eyes skimmed the courses and the view as she folded onto the towel. Lessons with a lot of bad golfers and searching for a lot of bad balls, but no one's ever caught me tucked in here. I needed this. It's nice to have a drink without having to worry about contributing to someone else's issue. Want to talk about it? Piper asked. Just things don't make sense right now. Brooke tilted her head back as the breeze ruffled her hair. Don't feel like you have to share. You can tell me about the job. She didn't want to intrude. Piper wondered if she'd crossed Brooke's mind nearly as often as Brooke had crossed hers. Brooke looked relieved at the subject change. The people are hosting some big reception and needed a lot of food for a lot of people. I told them I'd done lots of parties like this. Of course, I totally lied. I've worked parties that big, but I've never done one solo. You can do it. Piper stole a full body appraisal of Brooke and admired her long, full figure stretched out beside her. The distinct curve of her hips made Piper recall the half-painted figure waiting for her in her studio. Clearly, a subconscious force had directed her to her brush to recreate a replica of the woman laid out before her. Brooke turned on her side to face Piper, unintentionally replicating the pose of the faceless woman waiting on her canvas. Piper mirrored Brooke's pose and thought it was a great idea until she realized she could feel Brooke's breath on her cheek and when she spoke. The dark space between them was close and intimate, and Piper liked it too much. Brooke had now reclined fully onto her back and was staring up at the sky. Piper stopped herself from touching Brooke's arm, which lay only millimeters from her thigh. Seems like you're carrying a lot of heavy baggage, Piper said. Meg drinks too much. Brooke shocked herself with the ready revelation and spilled the summary of the last 5 years of her life. She felt the dread that always rode shotgun in her mind, and she contemplated her way out. Sorry, I didn't know I even had all that queued up. Means you don't get to vent much. I've been there, so I'm the perfect audience. Somehow just sitting next to Piper made her feel some strength build. Piper's voice was soothing, blending into the quiet of the evening rather than adding a layer to it. Brooke felt heard and understood for the first time in ages. A little glimpse of the life she once had and still really craved. I can't tell you how much this helped me tonight. Piper rose on her knees and reached across for the remainder of her beer. I'm very glad to hear it. I truly hope we can do it again. Brooke was in the middle of appraising the athletic body over her when her phone vibrated. She knew immediately her evening was over. Piper looked at her. Time to go? I suppose I should. Piper stood and held her hand out. Brooke pressed her fingers into Piper's palm and pulled her up to stand next to her. I want you to know that this was the best hour I've spent anywhere in a very long time. That's it.
Aw, I'm so glad we ended on such a sweet note. Awesome. If everyone can jump back on for a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Welcome back. Awesome. All right. So this panel's topic is meeting scenes, meet cutes, meet clashes, meet whatever you want to call it. So my question for you is, as writers, what do you think is the most important element of this scene? What is it that you're trying to show the most? Is it the character's personality, or the setting, or the attraction between the characters if you're writing a romance? What is it that you have in the back of your mind that you always try to get across in this scene? Why don't we start with Cass? Cass,
Melissa, you start. I'm still thinking. Sorry.
Sure. I guess for me, my goal in that first scene is to show that the relationship between these two people is unique for some way. It doesn't necessarily have to be instant attraction. It can be that they hate each other, but it has to be a special kind of hate. It has to be, there's a reason we're writing a book about these two people. And so we need that to come through the first time they meet. So my goal is for it not to be boring in some way or other, but it can be classified as a million different things as long as it stands out as special.
I like that. My goal is to not be boring. I feel like that's it's a good life rule. Greg, how about you? What do you try to get across in that first meeting?
Well, usually what I'm thinking about when I'm writing is how soon the deadline is. But for me, in this scene, I really wanted to get across how easy they got along with each other, how well they fit together. I didn't know how. I actually wasn't sure where I was going to take them, if it was actually going to turn into a romance or not when I originally wrote this scene. And so when I wrote it, they just felt so free and easy with each other. That's what, they got along so well. They just seemed to play off of each other so well, and that it was fun to write for me. So I really enjoyed writing that, finding that in the two of them. I don't usually write romance-y type stuff, so, or at least I don't think so. Maybe I do, I don't know. But I really wanted my main character to grow through the experiences he went through in this book, to get past the issues that put him in the place he was in at the start of this book, and finding another guy his own age who was actually a decent human being, as opposed to his evil ex, helped him realize that, I deserve this. I deserve to be happy. And that was one of the things I was really trying to do with Jake in the book, was help him realize that he deserves to be happy like anyone else does.
Oh,
that was a
good answer. All right. So current life rules: don't be boring, and you deserve to be happy. Jeanette, what you got?
Yeah, I think, like, at least what I tried to do in this, and the ones that I like to read during a meet cute, are like, that is unique, but also that it like sort of reflects the dynamic between the two characters, even if it is like that, like the hating first meeting, like that you can just like see the way they interact with each other even through it. So that, like, I don't know, when you're reading forward and you get through it and, they have their happily ever after, and you look back and you're like, oh yeah, that tracks. Like, that's definitely their characters. Like, that's why they met the way they did. So I guess, yeah, just like showing their personalities in it, regardless of whether it's sweet or it's like tension or whatever is there.
Cool. Awesome. And Cass, how about you? What do you put in the first meeting?
I like to, especially in this scene, because they'd already kind of met and there was a little bit of tension and a whole lot about Piper and her art. And so I wanted this scene to stand out because there was a lot of connection. And I wanted to illustrate that Brooke was going through all of this stuff and Piper could relate and they could kind of build from that place. They both had compromised a whole lot of things in their life, hence the title. And this way they could really kind of go beyond and see that there was, you know, a path to being happy, a path to that next step. And they could find that affinity with each other.
Sure. Yeah. Someone who really gets you. I love it. All right. To finish up, I have one last quick round question. And that is, what do you notice about people when you meet them for the first time? What's something that you tend to notice about people? Give everybody a second to think. Have their frozen deer in the headlights thinking faces. Greg, what do you notice about people?
I generally notice if they have a sense of humor or not, because usually I'm being an idiot when I meet people. So if they laugh, I have a pretty good sense that we'll get along. If they just kind of look at me, give me side eye, I'm just like, there's a lost cause. But fortunately, most people laugh, I think.
Well, I agree. I didn't notice that about people too. So maybe we're both got the bad jokes going. I don't know. Yes. How about you? What do you notice about people?
I think, sense of humor, definitely, but I think that all builds into energy. It's chemical for me. It's chemistry to know whether or not, wow, I could hang out and talk to this person, or I feel awkward, or I feel, a little like they're not very open. And that's a huge thing for me because I'm a closet introvert. So if you meet somebody and you can't immediately feel that chemistry, then I tend to tuck away and disappear. So
sure. Melissa, what do you notice about people?
I notice those things as well, but if I'm going to add to the discussion something new, I would say I notice confidence a lot of times. That's something that strikes me right off the bat, and it influences, I think, how I interact, because if I'm with somebody who's a little bit more confident, I think I know that I can hand them the reins a little bit more, because as a fellow introvert, sometimes I fall secondary in the conversation just naturally. And so if somebody's confident and kind of taking over, I'm like, this is great. And then if somebody is a little bit quieter or a little less self-assured, I notice the part of me kind of rises to the occasion and will take the reins in that sense and take over. But yeah, I mean, what the other guys said are so important too. That sense of humor is huge, and it then feeds into the chemistry that Cass mentioned. Because if you're pinging off somebody and the humor is there, then the chemistry is there, and that makes for a great scene in the book as well.
Awesome, I love it. And Jeanette, what do you notice when you first meet somebody?
Yeah, I think as a sometimes awkward extrovert, so on the opposite side of that introvert dynamic, just having somebody be able to feed back off of, because I can usually go up and talk to pretty much anybody, but having that dynamic of them feeling open around me, feeling comfortable around me, always trying to provide that, I don't know, that's what I'm always going for, and trying to foster that to make sure people feel comfortable. So yeah, I guess it's just the energy there with somebody, and we have the masks and everything, but just somebody smile, when you're able to get that smile from someone, or lack thereof, you kind of can gauge how it's going to go in a conversation.
I love that. I love that Jeanette picked pieces of what each of you said. I was yeah, all those things. It's awesome.
Bless.
All right. We are unfortunately almost at 9:00. So we do have to say goodbye for tonight. Half an hour.
Thanks, Sandy.
Have a
Bye,
great night.
everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.